Hello everyone and welcome to another casual review. Today I'm talking about Final Fantasy I Pixel Remaster. I am playing the mobile version of this game. There are only two current versions of this Pixel Remaster at the time of this recording, one being on mobile and the other one being on Steam. And so while playing this on the Switch would have probably been my number one choice, I am trying to be more open to the concept of mobile gaming because not all of it is money-hungry, free-to-play apps. There's some pretty cool games on here that you can just pay a flat amount and then you have that game forever on your phone. Now, the touch controls trip me up in this mobile version a lot more than I would have liked compared to using button controls. However, for a turn-based game like this, it's like not really that big of a deal. Most of the time, I just end up going off in the opposite direction that I mean to go, and then I just correct that. I also just think that this game is a good fit for one of those, like, not the main game that you're playing, but just something on the side, like while you're waiting in line, hanging out in the lunchroom, just something easy that you can pop open, play a little bit, and close it, compared to my main game that I'm playing on the Nintendo Switch. Now, I have had experience playing the first Final Fantasy before. I've already done a casual review for Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy XII, so go check those out if you're curious. As for the first one, I had the Final Fantasy Origins, I think the name of it. It's a collection of just the first and second Final Fantasy game for the PlayStation 1. And I have attempted to play through the first Final Fantasy many times, and the furthest I've ever gotten before was when I got the canoe, is the last memory I have of my most recent playthrough of that. So I can't tell you exactly one-to-one all of the changes that this Pixel Remaster changes up, but there are some notable differences, the biggest one obviously being the graphics, hence the game's title. There's a updated soundtrack, I know that. One of the features that makes this game incredibly playable for me is the ability to fast forward and just repeat all of the commands that you told your party to do the last turn. So if I told my whole party to do a basic attack and hit that fast forward button, then they will continuously do that command over and over again until I turn off that feature and tell them to do new commands. And this makes grinding and even just traversing incredibly easy and convenient. You know, I'm not a huge fan of these random encounters, and whenever you're in, like, the overworld or whenever you're exploring a dungeon, there is a random chance for a combat to be initiated. And when I was normally playing a game such as the original Final Fantasy, for example, it got quite tedious and quite frankly boring. Also, this is the type of game that requires you to grind up your party's levels really high in order to take on some of the endgame challenges, and this fast forward feature just made that a breeze. In fact, I think at least by the halfway point of my playthrough, I was severely over leveled and I could tackle pretty much any challenge except for the very final boss, and I don't know how anyone was able to beat that final boss on the original game, because even as a way higher level than I was supposed to be, he gave me some trouble, and I actually, my party actually wiped a couple times playing against him. So that being said, I am still like a novice to this game. I probably made a lot of mistakes and missed a lot of stuff that could have made my party stronger. I didn't exactly play along through a walkthrough. I pretty much just referenced a walkthrough whenever I did get stuck on a certain point, but other than that, I was playing a lot of this on my own. So yeah, there's a chance that I miss a lot of stuff that would really buff up my characters. Now, I think that this is the only Final Fantasy game that allows you to create your own party. I haven't played Final Fantasy 2 through 9 or 11, but from how I understand it, all of the other Final Fantasy games give you your assigned character, and there's actually plot and lore revolving around them. In this game, it has you choose 4 different characters with a different selection of classes, and they can all be the same or all be different, whatever you want. So like any unoriginal person, I named all of my characters off of The Simpsons. So I had my original warrior, and he kind of acted like my tank. He was meant to be taking up the brunt of the attacks. If you place your character the first slot in the party, then he's more likely to get hit than the rest of the people. So I created a warrior named Stampy. I created a red mage, and red mages are kind of like a jack of all trade. They're good at attacking, they're good at spells, but they're not like a master of any of that. While they are able to cast black magic and white magic, they aren't able to cast any high high level spells in either of those classes. However, he does make for a pretty good melee attacker as well. The red mage's name was Snowball 2. I created a monk, and at first I thought that the monk really sucked. So you are able to equip your characters with items. And early in the game, you are able to get nunchucks to give to your monk. However, I was stuck with a low level weapon, these iron nunchucks that I had on my monk forever, like a long time into the game. And it wasn't until much later than I probably should have realized, monks actually do a lot more damage when they aren't equipped with a weapon at all. I think it's like the base damage is like double whatever your monk's level is. And then suddenly my monk became my strongest melee attacker. This monk's name was Lenny. And then I had my black mage, and I debated whether I should have a healer in the party or another spell damager, and I decided that I should probably be able to get away with using my red mage as my basic healer, and I didn't regret that choice because I was so over-leveled. I never really needed a healer, save for that final boss where I felt like, man, I kind of wish that I had a white mage just to keep all of my party's health topped off. But the black mage's name was Kodos, and he was my main spell damager. Now, as far as my understanding goes, my melee attackers would do more damage to a single person, and my spells were meant for more groups of enemies. Not to mention, spells are limited to a certain number, and it doesn't really work on a mana system, like all spells take away from this pool of mana. It works more like the game Secret of Mana, where each tier of spells is limited to using a certain number of limits. So for instance, the strongest spell that a black mage can learn, Flare, is a level 8 or maybe a level 9 spell. However, I can only use any level 8 or 9 spell 9 times before I'm not able to use any of those 3 spells ever until I heal up again. Well, it is cool that you are able to make your own party and give them names and give them identities. It also means that they are essentially voiceless robots and there is no story revolving around them, so there is some level of imagination needed here. Just like the case of most older games. There's a part in this game, I don't know if I could say spoilers for this game or not. I think this game came out in 1987, so I'm going to give a lot of spoilers, I think. But there is a point in this game where you are encountered by this Dragon King, and you have to do this test of courage by gathering up a certain item from a dungeon, and then you bring it back to him, and he upgrades your whole party, and visually they look different, and they also do a lot of extra damage, and this was an exciting point in the game, because all of my previous playthroughs with Final Fantasy I, I had never reached this point before, so I didn't even know that was possible. I think I like the look of their previous version, however. They do look bigger and buffer when they get upgraded, but there is a certain level of charm to their first forms. So while there is no plot revolving around our main party of characters, there is the basic Final Fantasy plot about the 4 elemental crystals, and this plot is regurgitated quite often in the Final Fantasy series and its spin-offs. Bravely Default is one that comes to mind, but for those of you who don't know, basically there are 4 elemental crystals which represent the elements on the Earth. So there's Earth, Wind, Fire, and Water. And these 4 crystals have become corrupted. So legend foretells of this party with these 4 little crystals, and they are tasked with cleaning up the 4 corrupted crystals on the Earth, and basically each of these crystals is inhabited by a boss that you have to defeat at the end of each of these dungeons. So this remaster obviously gives us better visuals, and this is most notable in the spells and the fluid water. Just walking through town and seeing the rivers with the pixely looking river with the reflection, it looks so good. And whenever I use big ol' spells like the aforementioned Flare or Fire or Blizzaga, like all of these spells look so impressive, and the backgrounds of these battle scenes also look really nice. And just talking about like the static images for a second, even those look cool. Like this is even true to the original form of this game. The sprites for the enemies just look so awesome, and I could easily see why this is a popular game even back in the 80s, because it just invokes such imagination and fantasy, seeing this multitude of enemies that you can defeat that just looks so detailed, especially for the time. And obviously they were able to do this because they are static images, but just the sprite work in this Pixel remaster makes everything look really, really awesome and actually pretty impressive. Now, the soundtrack itself is also updated, and I wish, one of my gripes is they have this media player where you can listen to all of these songs outside of the main game. And one of my, this might just be like a minor gripe, but I tend to listen to video game music quite a lot, and I wish I was able to turn my phone to sleep when I was listening to this media player, because as it is right now, I have to leave my phone on, and if it does go to sleep in my pocket or whatever after 5 minutes or whatever the limit is set to, the media player turns off. Another cool feature that I can't quite remember if it was in the original game or not is the ability to pull up a map of the, not just of the overworld, but of the rooms in the dungeon that you are exploring as well. And this is extremely beneficial when you don't want to get lost in a dungeon, especially because there are random encounters. So the more time you spend wandering, the more likely you are to encounter more and more combat. So with this map, any room that you're in, you don't need to find the map or anything like that. It's just whenever you enter in a new room, you're able to pull up that map and see where your next destination is. And in the overworld, you're able to see how many items and chests that you've gotten out of each dungeon. So if you are a completionist, you can scroll through all of the different dungeons and see like, okay, in this dungeon, there were 5 chests and I only got 3 of them. So I can go back and get the other 2. You might also feel incentivized to do this because there is an achievement system in this remake, and I know that's not in the original game because achievements weren't really a thing yet, but if you want a little something extra to do with this Pixel remaster, you could go after those achievements. I think I only had 2 left that I did not accomplish, so one of them being to fill out every slot in the bestiary, and I think the bestiary is something new as well, where you are able to go through all of the enemy encounters that you have faced off with your playthrough and look up their stats and their details, and you're able to have these fake little battles against these enemies, and you can even do like an AR battle against any of these enemies using the bestiary, where it uses your phone's camera and it's like displayed on whatever's on your camera, which was extremely awesome. Like you just face it on your table, and this kind of works like the AR mode in Pokemon Go, if you've ever played that, where it just pops up in the real world. Part of me almost wishes that like all of my fights were like this, and I wonder, now that I say that, I wonder if there is even a setting to turn that on. I guess it does kind of take away from the world building and the immersion though. There's even a little feature where you can go through and look at some of the artwork in the gallery to see like just some of the creators' imaginations, and the artwork on the original Final Fantasy is actually really, really impressive because it isn't limited to this pixel art style, and you get to see some really awesome detailed imagery here and just what the creators initially had in mind when they built this first game way back in the 80s. Yeah, but as far as this like pixel remaster goes, my biggest gripe is not being able to listen to that really lovely music that was redone, and I think it's done really well in my opinion. So as far as the gameplay goes, it still is quite grindy and repetitive, but that's kind of what I was looking for when I picked up this game. My whole intention of purchasing it on the phone is being able to kind of play it in the background and be a little mindless about it, but still actively be working towards something. There's something that triggers the lizard brain in me, and I just like watching the numbers go up and my guys getting stronger, even if I'm not necessarily completely into it and active playing in it. Especially with this like auto play battle feature. I mean, it requires like just enough attention that you are still engaged in it, but you don't have to be 100% engaged in it. There's times when you get hit with like effects like poison, or one of the worst effects there is it's called like petrified or stone or whatever. That's not something that you can normally heal with a spell or at an inn. You have to use a gold needle, which is actually pretty expensive early on in the game. So that's like a frustrating effect that you have to deal with, and so you're still actively engaged with the game, but for the most part your guys are auto battling, which is, it's fine. I think that's exactly what I was looking for in a game like this. Deaths are another thing that you have to actively deal with, as Phoenix Downs only revive you with 1 hit point. If your guys die and you don't have a Phoenix Down, you have to take your dead teammate to a temple for them to revive you, and being down 1 party member is actually kind of a big deal. Overall, I think that this is a great great way to experience this piece of gaming history if you are at all curious about it. And I think that it is super accessible to newcomers like myself. And even though I wasn't like min-maxing, I still felt like the game was manageable and playable. However, I do believe that veterans of this game in particular might be bored. It is a little on the easier side, and a part of me wonders if this Pixel remaster did ease up on some of the difficulty here, so newcomers like myself could enjoy it. So if you're curious about it and you've never played it, I definitely think it's worth like the, what is it, like $12 price tag on the App Store? It might even be cheaper on Steam, I'm not sure. I do hope eventually these do come to the consoles, and I'm fairly confident that eventually they will, because that's just money lying on the table. But as far as what I'm kind of going for with these Final Fantasy playthroughs, I actually think that I'm going to stick to the mobile version of these games, and I definitely think that I will be purchasing the next Pixel remaster, that being Final Fantasy II, right after I'm done with this casual review. Actually, I'm going to get that to download, because it's been nice having this game to play through to fill up the empty spaces in my time. I will give this game a 3 out of 5. Part of me was wondering if I should actually give it a higher score, but I'm trying to think of it from both perspectives, this being like a main game that I'm just sitting down and playing, or just something that I can play on the side. And I think it would actually be a little boring if I was just sitting down and playing Final Fantasy for hours and hours and hours, which doesn't really sound like it's a good game, but you know, I think that it's definitely worth a playthrough. Well guys, that's it for me. Let me know what you think about Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster, or the Final Fantasy series in general, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye!